Diane Keaton could have married anyone, but she chose not to. Al Pacino wanted her. Woody Allen adored her. Even Keanu Reeves was rumored to be smitten by her. But yet, she didn't want the marriage label. Why? Well, stay tuned, because Diane just revealed why she has chosen to stay single after all these years. Little beginnings. Before the fame, before the hats and the Hollywood charm, Diane Keaton was just Diane Hall, a girl from Los Angeles with a front-row seat to her first taste of the spotlight. She was born on January 5, 1946, into a home that, on the surface, looked pretty traditional. Her father, Jack, was a real estate broker and civil engineer. Her mother, Dorothy, was a homemaker, but not your average one. She had a creative spark, a love for photography, and a performer's heart. In fact, Dorothy once won the Mrs. Los Angeles pageant, not just a beauty contest, but a full production. Lights, applause, cameras, and for young Diane, sitting in the crowd, it was more than a proud daughter moment. It was a revelation, that stage, that attention, that sense of being seen. It stirred something in her. She didn't want a normal life. She wanted a big one. Raised in a Free Methodist home, Diane was taught about structure and tradition. But even early on, she leaned toward freedom over formality. She found inspiration in women like Katharine Hepburn, not for the dresses or the fame, but for the fire. Hepburn played women who didn't wait to be saved. That was the kind of woman Diane wanted to be. At Santa Ana High School, she wasn't just another student, she stood out, especially on stage. She took on roles with weight, like Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire. It was intense material for a teenager, but Diane didn't back down. Even then, she wasn't performing to impress. She was performing to express. College came next. First Santa Ana, then Orange Coast. But it didn't stick. Diane wasn't built for sitting still. So she did what so many dream of and few actually do. She moved to New York City to chase it all. That move would change everything. She trained at the neighborhood playhouse, diving deep into the Meisner technique, a style that taught her to really listen, to respond, and to stay present. It was there she learned that acting wasn't about lines. It was about connection. While studying, she supported herself with singing gigs at nightclubs. Those performances would echo later in Annie Hall and beyond. But even more defining was a simple moment when she joined the Actors Equity Association and found that someone else had already taken her birth name. So she chose a new one, her mother's maiden name, Keaton. It was more than a name change. It was her first big rewrite, a step toward becoming the woman she wanted to be, not someone people expected her to be. She wasn't aiming for stardom in the typical sense. She was crafting a life on her own terms. And even in those early years, it was clear. Diane Keaton wasn't here to fit into a role. She was here to create her own. Diane Keaton's career. In 1968, Diane Keaton landed a spot as an understudy for the role of Sheila in the original Broadway production of Hair. The show was known for pushing boundaries, including a scene where the cast appeared nude at the end of Act 1. Nudity was optional, but those who chose to perform nude received a $50 bonus. Keaton refused not for the money or attention, but because it simply wasn't her. That choice made her stand out. After 9 months in Hair, she auditioned for Woody Allen's Broadway play, Play It Again, Sam. At first, she almost didn't get the role because she was taller than Allen. Keaton was 5 feet 8 inches, 2 inches taller than Woody himself, but that didn't stop her. She got the part and ran with it, earning a Tony Award nomination for Best Featured Actress in a Play. The following year, she made her film debut in Lovers and Other Strangers. That opened the door to more work, including guest roles on popular TV shows like Love, American Style, Night Gallery, and Mannix. In between acting gigs, she even did a few deodorant commercials. Whatever it took to stay in the game. Then came the breakthrough. In 1972, Keaton was cast as Kay Adams in The Godfather, playing the girlfriend and later wife of Michael Corleone. played by Al Pacino. Director Francis Ford Coppola had noticed her in Lovers and Other Strangers. What drew him in wasn't just her acting, it was her offbeat energy, the same kooky label people in the industry often use to describe her. Keaton brought that quiet, thoughtful presence to The Godfather. She later said that both the role and the experience of filming felt like being the woman in a world of men. The movie was a massive success. It became the highest-grossing film of 1972 and won the Academy Award for Best Picture. 2 years later, she returned as Kay in The Godfather Part 2. At first, she wasn't sure about doing it again. She was skeptical, but when she read the script, the character felt much more substantial. In the sequel, Kay wasn't just the wife in the background. She was bitter, conflicted, and finally brave enough to walk away from Michael's world. Still, not everyone saw her impact. Some critics felt Kay's role was too small. Time magazine called her invisible in the first film and pallid in the second, but others disagreed. Empire magazine later called Keaton the quiet linchpin, someone who held the story together in a world dominated by men. And they were right. Even when the spotlight wasn't on her, Diane Keaton knew how to leave a mark. Diane Keaton's romantic escapades. Diane Keaton has never needed a wedding ring to keep the world hooked on her romantic history. The Oscar-winning actress has captured hearts on-screen for decades, but it's her off-screen love life that reads like the ultimate Hollywood screenplay. Overflowing with star power, tender confessions, and enough charisma to light up the Sunset Strip, Keaton's list of lovers is a true who's who of Tinseltown's leading men. She may joke about being an old maid, but Keaton's love life proves she's anything but ordinary. Fiercely independent, enchantingly eccentric, and endlessly fascinating, she's dated some of the most iconic men in film, many of whom she met right on set. Life imitating art? Absolutely. And what a compelling story it's made. Each man had a different decade, Keaton once quipped to The Telegraph, and she wasn't exaggerating. From the swinging 60s to the bold and brilliant 80s, Diane's heart followed the rhythm of the eras, each romance unfolding like a chapter in a classic Hollywood novel. It's no coincidence that at the 2017 American Film Institute Lifetime Achievement Awards, 3 of her most legendary former lovers stood before her, not as exes, but as admirers still clearly under her spell. Among them was Warren Beatty, the man who swept her into the 80s with the kind of charm that could only come from a director who saw the world and the women in it with cinematic wonder. They met on the set of Reds, where Beatty's intellect and magnetic energy captivated not just audiences, but Keaton herself. In a 2017 interview, she called Beatty a brilliant character, her admiration still palpable decades later. There was an intensity between them, undeniable and unforgettable. But in the end, it couldn't sustain the weight of 2 very different lives. Beatty, ever the family man, and Keaton, forever orbiting on her own terms, drifted apart. Still, the way he described her at the AFI tribute, an unpredictable, mysterious, suspenseful, constantly surprising, sometimes comedic, sometimes tragic, always engaging plot, felt like a love letter sealed with applause. Long before Beatty, though, there was Woody Allen. If the chemistry between Annie Hall and Alvy Singer felt electric, it's because it was. Their story began years earlier, when Keaton auditioned for Play It Again, Sam, and something clicked. She was smitten, and she immediately wanted to be Allen's girlfriend. She once admitted this in a 1996 interview. So she worked at it, and for a while, it worked. Their romance, which lasted 3 years, was as much about creative synergy as it was emotional entanglement. It wasn't smooth. Allen once told her that living with her is like walking on eggshells, a line that hints at the friction beneath the fascination. But their bond shaped some of the most iconic work of the era, and their connection, though no longer romantic, has endured as a kind of artistic love story that never fully ended. Then came Al Pacino. It was 1972, on the set of The Godfather when Keaton first saw him and felt something she couldn't shake. Keaton was really very taken with Al from the very beginning, but their real-life romance didn't begin until the sequel rolled around. What followed was a decade-spanning relationship marked by passion, heartbreak, and the kind of back and forth that only Hollywood, or perhaps fate, could script. They were on, then off, then on again. Keaton gave it everything, but eventually she wanted more. Marriage, stability, and Pacino didn't. She once revealed that she worked hard on Al Pacino, but she went about it in a not perfect way. Keaton gave Pacino an ultimatum to either pick marriage or break up. Al Pacino chose to walk away. Still, the emotional residue never really cleared. In her memoir, Then Again, she distilled it down to a single truth. The Godfathers, all three of them, were about one thing: Al. Even years later, the admiration lingered. "I was mad for him," she said. "Charming, hilarious, a non-stop talker, and oh, gorgeous." When Pacino took the stage in 2017 to honor her, he didn't miss a beat. "I love you forever." You could almost hear the audience exhale. And then there was Keanu Reeves. If Keaton's earlier relationships played out like sweeping romantic dramas, her rumored connection with Reeves felt more like a beautifully ambiguous indie film, one with just enough intrigue to keep you wondering. In Something's Gotta Give, 2003, they lit up the screen with a kind of easy, soulful chemistry that made fans ask the obvious. Was this real? In 2005, the rumor mill kicked into high gear when Reeves reportedly left a relationship, and whispers of something off-screen between him and Keaton caught fire. Neither of them confirmed anything, of course, but neither denied anything either. And in classic Keaton fashion, she didn't shy away from the idea when asked about it by Oprah in 2006. "I'm going to marry him," she joked. "He likes an older woman." Whether they dated or didn't, whether it was real or just a wish the world shared, it felt possible. That's the thing about Keaton. She makes you believe in maybes. From Alan to Pacino to possibly Reeves, Diane Keaton's love life hasn't needed a conventional ending to feel complete. Romantic, messy, thrilling, and achingly human. She's lived 1,000 love stories, each one brimming with its own kind of brilliance. And while she may have never said, "I do," she's shown us something even rarer: how to love fiercely, fall bravely, and remain unmistakably herself through it all. Standing up for Woody Allen. For decades, Diane Keaton has been known as one of Hollywood's most beloved icons. A quirky, stylish, and soft-spoken woman whose career rarely brushed with controversy. But one of her closest collaborators and ex-boyfriends, Woody Allen, is a name that stirs far more complex emotions. Once celebrated as a comedic genius and one of the most influential directors in American cinema, Allen's legacy is now permanently clouded by a scandal that began in the early 1990s and has refused to fade. In 1992, Allen was 56 and in a long-term relationship with actress Mia Farrow. The two had never married, but they had been together for 12 years and shared a family. They had 3 children, one biological, Satchel, now known as Ronan Farrow, and 2 adopted, Dylan and Moses Farrow. Mia had other children from previous relationships, including Soon Yi Previn, whom she had adopted with her former partner, conductor Andre Previn. One day, in the early morning of January 1992, Mia Farrow walked into Allen's Manhattan apartment. And what she found was so shocking and disturbing. In Allen's apartment, she found a stack of Polaroid photographs lying around. And these photographs weren't just inappropriate, they were explicit. In them was Soon Yi Previn, their adopted daughter, completely undressed. At the time, Soon Yi was 21 years old, while Allen, again, was 56 years old. Mia was horrified by this discovery. According to her, Allen admitted to the affair. In a rage, she took the photos and confronted him. What followed was one of the most public and chaotic scandals in Hollywood history. The relationship between Woody Allen and Soon-Yi shocked the world. It wasn't just the age gap, it was the context. While Allen and Soon-Yi weren't biologically related, many viewed it as a gross violation of trust. Allen had been a father figure, if not legally, then certainly in spirit. And Soon-Yi had grown up in a household where he was a consistent adult presence. To many, it felt like a betrayal not just of Mia Farrow, but of the entire family dynamic. Allen, however, saw things differently. He described their relationship as one of mutual affection that blossomed only after Soon-Yi had reached adulthood. But the world wasn't buying it. And then, just when it seemed the scandal couldn't get more disturbing, another even darker allegation came to light. Just months after the affair with Soon-Yi was revealed, Mia Farrow accused Woody Allen of sexually abusing their 7-year-old adopted daughter, Dylan Farrow. According to Mia, the alleged incident happened on August 4, 1992, at her Connecticut home. That day, the household was full. Babysitters, friends, and a tutor were present. Yet, at some point, Dylan was allegedly missing for about 20 minutes, and no one seemed to know exactly where she had gone. One babysitter, Allison Strickland, testified later that she walked into a room and saw Allen with his head in Dylan's lap. Dylan, another babysitter noticed, wasn't wearing underwear. Alarmed by what she'd heard and observed, Mia took Dylan to a pediatrician, who found no signs of physical abuse. But the emotional toll was already severe. Allen denied everything. He said the allegations were part of a revenge campaign orchestrated by Mia, who was enraged over his relationship with Soon-Yi. He insisted that Mia had coached Dylan into making false statements, weaponizing their daughter in a bitter custody battle. As the media pounced, the narrative split. Some saw Allen as a predatory figure caught in an unforgivable web of his own making. Others, particularly Diane Keaton, Jude Law, Alec Baldwin, and several others, stood by him. The dispute, however, soon moved into the courtroom. Allen filed a lawsuit seeking custody of Dylan, Moses, and Satchel. In response, Mia Farrow presented a videotape of Dylan describing the alleged abuse, but the tape had been edited. There were jump cuts. Critics pointed out that Mia was behind the camera, asking leading questions. This raised doubts about its authenticity. During the trial, several people testified about that day. Babysitters confirmed there was a period of around 15 to 20 minutes when Allen and Dylan were missing. Allen claimed he had gone to the bathroom. Dr. John Leventhal, a pediatrician and director at Yale New Haven Hospital, evaluated Dylan and told the court that her statements about the abuse were inconsistent. He believed she may have been coached, or that she may have internalized a false memory. However, he couldn't say definitively that nothing happened. Despite Allen's legal efforts, the judge, Elliot Wilk, sided with Mia. He called Allen's behavior grossly inappropriate and described him as self-absorbed, untrustworthy, and insensitive. He denied Allen custody of the children, though he allowed supervised visitation. Even so, Allen faced no criminal charges. The state's attorney in Connecticut, Frank Mako, said he had enough evidence to prosecute, but chose not to, explaining that Dylan's emotional well-being was more important than the trauma of a courtroom trial. The case was left in legal limbo. Allen wasn't convicted, but neither was he cleared. In 1997, Allen married Soon-Yi Prep. They've remained together ever since. Despite the controversy, Allen continued working, releasing film after film, many of them critically acclaimed. He won an Academy Award for Midnight in Paris in 2011, and stars continued to line up to work with him. But public opinion began to shift, especially as the years passed and the cultural climate evolved. The scandal never fully went away, but it lingered in the shadows until one day it didn't. In 2014, Dylan Farrow, now an adult, wrote a powerful open letter published by the New York Times. In it, she repeated her allegations and called out the industry that had continued to celebrate Woody Allen while she felt silenced and forgotten. For so long, Woody Allen's acceptance silenced me, she wrote. She named several actors: Cate Blanchett, Alec Baldwin, Scarlett Johansson, and Diane Keaton, and asked, "What if it had been your child?" Allen replied with a letter of his own, again denying the abuse and accusing Mia of manipulating Dylan. He painted himself as the true victim of a vindictive ex-partner and a public eager to believe the worst. Dylan responded almost immediately, standing firm. "I will live with the memory of what he did to me for the rest of my life." Among those Dylan addressed directly was Diane Keaton, perhaps Allen's most iconic collaborator. The two had worked on classics like Annie Hall and Manhattan, and remained close friends long after. Keaton had always been publicly supportive of Allen. In interviews, she praised his talent and humor. Once, she recounted sitting on a bench with him when he turned to her and said, "I wonder if I'd think you were attractive if I didn't know you." She laughed, saying he was a jerk, but she said it fondly, even admiringly. In a later interview, long after the scandal, she said simply, "I believe my friend. It was a choice, and it didn't sit well with everyone." Dylan, in her letter, wrote, "You knew me when I was a little girl, Diane Keaton. Have you forgotten me?" Today, Woody Allen is a man with two legacies. One is cinematic brilliance, a body of work that includes iconic award-winning films and a style that reshaped American storytelling. The other is a cloud of accusations, troubling behavior, and a family broken in ways the public can never fully understand. For some, the scandal is proof that fame can shield even the worst offenses. For others, it's a tragic tale of false memory and media bias. What's clear is this: Allen's name, no matter how many films he makes or how many actors defend him, will forever be entangled with one of the most disturbing stories in Hollywood history. And the question that still lingers decades later is one we're not likely to stop asking anytime soon. What do we do when the artist and the allegations can no longer be separated? The real reason Diane Keaton never got married. Diane Keaton's life story reads like an unexpected script Hollywood never quite saw coming. One that didn't end in a whirlwind romance or a traditional family, but instead followed the bold arc of self-definition. Long celebrated for her roles, Keaton has always stood slightly apart from the Hollywood crowd. While many of her peers stepped into marriages, some for love, others for optics, Keaton quietly chose a different route. She remained single, not temporarily, not in between relationships, entirely, and on her own terms. From a young age, the idea of marriage never truly appealed to her. It wasn't that love hadn't shown up in her life. She'd had flings and complicated connections with some of Hollywood's most notable men, but Keaton had a vision for her life that didn't necessarily include a ring, a husband, or the white picket fence fantasy so often assigned to women of her generation. In truth, much of her stance on marriage came from someone very close to her, her mother. Keaton grew up in a household where she saw firsthand what it looked like for a woman to dedicate her life to family. Her mother, by all accounts, was loving and selfless, always putting her children's needs before her own. But behind that devotion, Keaton sensed something else: dreams that had quietly been packed away, aspirations never quite realized. It was a kind of haunting lesson. Watching her mother surrender her ambitions stirred something in Keaton. She came to fear that marriage might mean giving up the very thing that made her feel most alive, her independence. And so, even as she climbed the Hollywood ladder and earned acclaim, she made a conscious decision to stand alone. Not because she was lonely, but because she refused to let go of herself. That decision came with consequences. Keaton was acutely aware of how the world perceived women like her, aging and unmarried. The industry she worked in wasn't particularly kind to women past a certain age, and even less so to those without husbands or children to define them. The old maid stereotype, that lingering insult cast on women who didn't settle down, loomed in every corner of public opinion. But Keaton never let it consume her. In fact, she fought back against it in the most unassuming way possible, by living fully, unapologetically, and joyfully in her own skin. While her peers were being photographed walking down aisles or gracing tabloids with their latest engagements, Keaton was building a life filled with art, architecture, acting, and deep introspection. Yet, just when the world might have assumed that she had closed the chapter on motherhood too, Keaton took another path that once again challenged convention. In her early 50s, an age by which most people believe certain doors have closed, Keaton opened one she had long considered but never fully walked through. She became a mother. 1996, at 50, Diane Keaton adopted a daughter, Dexter. It was a decision that came after years of internal debate, made more urgent and clear after the death of her father. Losing him had a profound impact. It forced her to reckon with mortality, with the legacy she wanted to leave, and with the parts of life she might still be curious to explore. Parenthood had never been something she felt instinctively drawn to. For decades, she had pushed it aside, unsure if she was even capable of the role. But somewhere between reflection and longing, the idea transformed from a quiet maybe into a powerful yes. 5 years later, in 2001, she expanded her family again, this time with her son, Duke. The woman who once declared she couldn't see herself as a mother now found herself raising 2 children on her own. No partner to lean on, no traditional playbook to follow. Just Keaton, fiercely independent, lovingly unconventional, and deeply present. Motherhood, for Keaton, wasn't about biology or social expectation. It was a decision made out of intention. She didn't fall into it, she walked directly toward it. And although it terrified her at times, the role became something she would later describe as the greatest choice of her life. In raising Dexter and Duke, Keaton found a kind of love that filled the quiet spaces her other passions couldn't reach. Not romantic love, not the love of fans or audiences, but the grounding, everyday love that comes from showing up, day after day, for 2 young lives. Still, despite the transformation motherhood brought, Keaton never wavered in her stance on marriage. She continued to live alone, content, fulfilled, and utterly comfortable in her solitude. In a culture that often treats singleness as a phase to be fixed or a flaw to be pitied, she stood as a rare counter-narrative. Her life wasn't missing anything. It was exactly as she had chosen it to be. Even more striking was how open she was about the reality of her dating life. In her 70s, she casually admitted that she hadn't been on a date in over 3 decades. To some, that revelation might sound bleak or strange. To Keaton, it was simply a fact, one that didn't bother her in the slightest. She had cultivated a life so rich with meaning and memory that the absence of romance didn't feel like a gap. It felt like space. Space for creativity, for motherhood, for independence, for self. Keaton's story doesn't fit into the glossy scripts that Hollywood often tries to sell. She didn't marry the leading man. She didn't retreat into heartbreak. She didn't crumble under the weight of time or expectation. Instead, she crafted a narrative all her own, one of personal truth, radical independence, and love that didn't need to come from anyone else to feel complete. Diane Keaton's health concerns. Although Diane Keaton might have the upper hand when it comes to relationships, the same cannot be said about her health. In 2014, Keaton let the world in on a chapter of her life that had remained mostly hidden. A chapter defined by addiction, secrecy, and the crushing pressure to be thin. Long before she was celebrated for her wit and ageless elegance, she was a young actress in her 20s, struggling under the unbearable weight of the entertainment industry's expectations and her own. The turning point came early in her career. After catching the eye of a Broadway director during her time in Hair, Keaton was offered a significant role, but it came with a condition: she had to lose weight. That seemingly casual demand sent her spiraling into a toxic relationship with food that would haunt her for years. What started as a desperate attempt to fit into a role became an all-consuming disorder that overtook her daily life. Bulimia gripped her like a shadow. On the surface, Keaton may have seemed like a rising star with a bright future, but in reality, she was silently battling a relentless addiction. Her binges were enormous, surreal even. A single episode of overeating could include an entire bucket of fried chicken, piles of fries slathered in ketchup and blue cheese, TV dinners, candy by the pound, soda in terrifying quantities, and desserts that would easily feed a room full of people. Whole cakes, banana cream pies, sweets that were both comfort and punishment. This wasn't about indulgence, it was about compulsion. It was about trying to fill a void that no amount of food could ever satisfy. Yet, no one around her could tell. That's part of the insidious nature of bulimia. It thrives in secrecy. Keaton knew how to mask it, how to laugh, charm, and deliver the perfect line while internally spiraling. I was a fat person. I was an obese person who had somehow tricked myself and managed to hide it, she later revealed. She wasn't speaking about literal body size, but about the way her mind perceived herself, how disordered eating distorted her reality and robbed her of peace. For 4 years, she lived this double life, consumed by food and shame, constantly binging, purging, hiding, and pretending. To live in a lie that long is corrosive. The secrecy festers and becomes part of your identity. Keaton later acknowledged that her condition wasn't just an eating disorder, it was an addiction, plain and simple. And like most addicts, she knew that even years into recovery, the tendencies never fully leave. "I'm an addict in recovery. I'll always be an addict," she admitted. It was a candid statement, but also a freeing one. For someone who had spent so long silently suffering, owning her story became an act of defiance. And for someone like Keaton, whose face was projected on big screens for generations, aging meant confronting that pressure with brutal honesty. In later years, as the lines on her face deepened and her body changed, as all bodies naturally do, Keaton spoke about the fears and grief that can come with growing older in a world that celebrates youth. "I don't think it gets easier as you get older," she admitted. "I think it gets more pressing. It's really about death." There was no sugarcoating, no whimsical detour around the truth. Keaton was never one to offer false hope. Her words weren't meant to depress, but to shine a light on the raw interiority of life as a woman aging in a spotlight that rarely allows women to do so gracefully. And yet, despite the years of anguish, the addiction, and the self-doubt, Keaton has managed to transform her suffering into strength. She has never asked to be called brave, but there is something unshakably courageous in her willingness to peel back the polished veneer and show the scars beneath. In doing so, she has rewritten what it means to be a Hollywood icon. She is not just the eccentric leading lady with the perfectly tilted hat and crisp white shirt. She is a survivor. She is someone who clawed her way out of addiction and shame and stepped into the later years of her life with unflinching self-awareness. What Diane Keaton movie have you seen? And did you ever know that Keaton suffered from bulimia? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click on the next video that pops up. You won't want to miss it.